Welcome, everyone. I hope you can hear us. My name is Dr. Catherine Feather, and I'm an assistant professor in the Counselor Education School Psychology and Human Services program. Specifically, I teach in counselor education, so welcome.
Everybody, my name is Dr. Heather Dahl-Jacinto. I'm associate professor and the program coordinator for our counseling programs.
And I'm the other Heather, Heather Van Ness, and I'm an associate professor in residence in the Early Childhood Multilingual and Special Education Department.
All right, so we know you all signed up for this webinar because you're obviously interested in hearing more about suicidality, how to respond to a student who is presenting with suicidal ideation in the classroom. Specifically, we're going to be talking about and focusing in on how teachers can respond and refer and specific steps in doing that, as well as sharing with you all a little bit of scholarship that we've engaged in. As of, I think, last year is when we gathered the data, specifically from an accelerated licensure program. So we'll be talking a little bit about the findings, and then we'll be going into implications for the classroom, specific action steps you can take as teachers, as well as action steps that the whole school can take in response to the crisis that we think that it's unfolding in the schools. And again, probably why you all are attending today. So speaking of just the crisis that's happening in the school, so back in 2011, a bunch of organizations came together and said, wow, and this is in the midst of the pandemic, right? And said, our children are in crisis. Like there is an immense amount of mental health that's occurring, trauma, loneliness, hopelessness, suicidal ideation, and it's been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And based on that, schools responded. Maybe they set aside money for funding, maybe not. But there is definitely crisis happening, and this is kind of what ignited our interest in gathering data from teachers who are in this accelerated licensure program and getting an idea of, one, were they able to identify that something was wrong based on a case, and two, what were their responses to it and how did they provide, what sort of interventions did they provide to support this student? But we'll go into that a little bit later. So we figured we'd start. We don't want to bog you all down with the facts and stats, right? Like we know that this is a problem and it's a crisis, but it's important to highlight. And we want to focus in on some statistics that, hey, oh, there you go, thank you, that are a little alarming that we want to draw your attention to. So since 2011, there's definitely been a 60% increase in the suicide rate among US youth, specifically when it comes to ages 5 to 11 and 10 to 14 years old. So today we're really going to be focusing in on the warning signs for that specific population demographic that we'll talk about a little bit later. But also that's alarming too is that the recent statistic as early as I think 2014 mentioned or were able to identify that 20.4% of high school students report seriously considering suicide over the last 12 months. So we know that this is occurring. It's not if a teacher is going to interface with a student, it's when, and it doesn't matter the age. It can range, it can be as young as 5 and it can be as old as obviously students that are in high school. Again, like facts and stats are important, but we really wanted to highlight just a little bit the risk factors that you want to consider and what you want to look for that would that you'd be like, okay, this puts a student at risk. So really quickly, we know that adverse childhood experiences, trauma would put someone at risk. Bullying is definitely a risk factor that we see. High conflict and violent relationships can also be a risk factor. Social isolation, a history of depression, and really any other mental health diagnoses like anxiety, PTSD, substance misuse, as well as just an overarching feeling of hopelessness. So I think the biggest takeaway from the facts and stats is that young people are experiencing a level of distress and trauma that requires, we think, urgent action, especially when it comes to school-based supports. And we also know that this is a great place for students to receive the services that they may need. So next slide, Heather, sorry. All right, so what we know. So when it comes to specifically teachers, so We know based on policies and procedures that their teacher scope of practice is expanding. We know that social emotional learning is is embedded within the curriculum. We also know too that based on, depending on what program you're enrolled in or what professional development you're exposed to, it's varied what teachers, what kind of mental health information teachers are exposed to early on. Also, we know that depending on that preparation program, you may or may not, or professional development, get excessive or brief gatekeeper training. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So while training can be maybe inconsistent, whether it's in, the student's licensure program or within professional development, 50% of teachers report that they've had direct contact with students experiencing some sort of suicidal ideation. When asked specifically how teachers respond to a student voicing suicidal thoughts, teachers indicated three main themes. They mentioned that they would refer a student to a school-based mental health professional. Awesome. That's something we'll talk about more. Some talked about how they would refer to they would inform the student's guardian, right, of what's happening, what occurred. And then also they would maybe even provide some sort of like intervention themselves to support the student. So while most teachers will act and based on how the student's presenting, there have been some research studies that have found that 27% of teachers have reported you know what, I just avoid that topic in general. I will even avoid the student because I don't feel prepared or because I don't have the skills or because I just don't want to deal with it because I have all these other things going on. Maybe someone else will pick up on it. So 27%, which is a bit of an alarming stat. So we know teachers are uniquely positioned to observe and monitor students' behavior over time because obviously they're in the classroom. You see them day to day, and you're able to see behavior change over time. So as a result, teachers can really be an asset, and this is very true, to supporting the mental health of students' needs and attending to them and identifying students who are at risk and reporting these concerns of this, maybe a change in behavior or what the student has shared with you based on the rapport that you've built with that student to a professional. Also, we know based on research that administrators, even school counselors, school psychologists really rely on teachers for that referral, to be tapped into their students, to know that something's wrong and they need to talk to someone. All right, so let's go into suicide gatekeeper training. So this can vary, but when suicide prevention training is implemented, there are positive effects across all. There are positive effects, and we know this. We'll go into that a little bit deeper. When it comes to extensive gatekeeper training, we see that teachers are able to build their knowledge. They increase their self-efficacy and even their attitude to address a student who's in front of them that's maybe presenting with suicidal ideation. And they're also able to take the action steps to interface with that student. So extensive gatekeeper training increases their confidence, increases their ability to attend to the student who is in crisis, and then gives them the resources. They know the protocols of what happens next, so they can connect the student with appropriate person within the school, or depending on who that person is, right? Sometimes schools don't have a school counselor, maybe the school psychologist isn't there. So what are the action steps? There's protocols that are in place of where we can bring the student if they are in crisis and they need support, a higher level of support. But we know too that schools don't always provide this extensive gatekeeper training, or maybe it's an hour professional development. And while brief is great, right? We know brief is good, at least increases your knowledge and increases self-efficacy. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's behavior changes. So what do I mean by that? It means that teachers don't feel confident enough to then provide the student with supportive services, knowing what to say, knowing what to do, and how to make the referral. So what we recommend and what we're going to talk about later in more detail is the importance of really having extensive gatekeeper training, experiential activities. So you get that kinesthetic learning, right? So it's not just like you're hearing it, you're seeing it, but you're doing it. And by doing it, it increases the likelihood that you're able to respond to a student appropriately and provide the referral. All right, next slide. So the purpose, really quick, as I mentioned before, we're just going to be going over a little bit of the findings of our study. But the purpose was just to gain a deeper understanding of how student teachers in an accelerated training program respond to a student who's presenting with suicidal risk factors and different warning signs. So the student is Lulu, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But we wanted to know, overarching, the research question was, how do teachers interface with a student presenting with suicidality specifically?
Great. Hi, everybody. Dr. Feather's already given you so much good information. I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about the study that we did last year together. So I'm going to flip to the next slide. So we were really interested in knowing what teachers are already doing going into the system that they're going to be working in. So we were curious just how much they're attuning to suicidality when they're working with kiddos. And so for Lulu's case, which you'll all get to read in a minute, we recruited 21 initial licensure educators. They were given a case vignette, and then they were asked to respond to specific questions about that case vignette. So we, as you're going to see, and I'll read it to you, our case vignette was written to have multiple risk factors of suicide. So anybody reading this, if you know suicide risk factors or you know things to watch out for when you're assessing for suicidality, you're going to look at this kiddo and say, I need to do something about this. So we tried to make it very clear, but not to the point where we specifically said the word suicide in the assessment or in the case vignette. So our goal was to see if the teachers could attune to that before we told them to attune to it. So I'm going to bring up the case study. So I'm going to read this to you. And the reason I'm reading it to you is I think it gives you a good idea of what suicide risk looks like. And it also situates you in what our participants were asked to do. So Lulu, 16 years old, comes to you after class because a friend told her she should speak to you, her teacher. She tells you that she recently broke up with her girlfriend and is sad and feeling stressed with life. Quote, I wish I hadn't been born. She says she hasn't been sleeping and is staying up all night looking at TikTok. When you press, she admits to being bullied at school and she considered them her BFFs. She is devastated and depressed and has been skipping class, hiding out in the bathroom on school grounds. She mentions her ex-girlfriend was her only support since her friend died, and now she has no one. She says that she is drinking sometimes, but, quote, it's not a big deal. When speaking to you, Lulu uses a lot of language like, quote, no one cares about me. It doesn't matter what I do. As some background, as her teacher, you've noticed that Lulu recently seems to be acting differently, including feeling easily frustrated, upset, and has missed quite a few classes. Her grades have dropped, and you haven't been able to engage her or her parents in a plan of action. While you haven't noticed the bullying, you did know that Lulu recently had a friend died, and she's been isolating herself in class. I can't remember the number of suicide risk factors we have in here, but I think it's above 10. And so again, just thinking back to what Dr. Feather was talking about earlier in our stats and facts page, you can probably pick up a few of these that are things that you would want to notice. And when Dr. Van Ness talks later, she's going to go more in depth on that piece as well, just the importance of warning. So we then asked our participants to answer a few questions, and we set this up strategically. I don't want to say cagily, but we intentionally set up our questions in a certain way. So this is the questions and the question or the statement that they received. So when reviewing Lulu's situation, try to be reflective of your practice as a teacher as you answer the following open-ended questions. And so on page 1, the first 3 questions that they saw were, what were your initial impressions of Lulu's situations? How would you support Lulu? Take a moment to think about what you might do in the moment and in the future, and please write those ideas here. What resources, if any, might you connect Lulu to? So as you can see from those first three, there is nothing about crisis or suicidal ideation. It's generally just asking, where would you meet Lulu where she's at, and what does that look like? And we'll talk a little bit about the findings on where we kind of saw answers relating to that. Once we got to page 2, we were more specific. We wanted to know specifically about suicide risk factors. So once they finished writing their page 1 questions, they moved to page 2. When reading Lulu's case, did you notice suicide risk factors? If so, please list what stood out to you. What mental health support, if any, would you provide Lulu? And thinking about the students you work with, how comfortable would you be supporting any student who voices mental health needs in a school setting? So the idea here was to get a general idea of what their first inclination was when they read Lulu's story. So that was page 1. And in page 2, we wanted to really see how, if at all, they were conceptualizing mental health or suicidality in Lulu's case. Anything to add to that, Dr. Van Ness or Feather? Okay. All right, and so we're back to the findings. Dr. Feather, did you want to start this? And
Yeah, sure. So we had 3 overarching themes that came out of like the 2 different page 1, page 2 of the responses. The first one we labeled as like gut reaction. So they recognized that something was wrong. And this was even before they got to page 2. Like there were lots of things like, wow, this student really needs help and guidance, and I'm here to support that. And I'm going to already be thinking about what I want to ask, the specific questions I want to ask. I want to come at it empathically, in addition to thinking about what I can do as a teacher to address like the curriculum that we can start infusing, recognizing that there's a bullying problem. And so this is something I'd like to address in the classroom as well. And then we also gave like, how comfortable, like, do you feel? Somewhat, very comfortable. And they felt pretty comfortable addressing students' mental health. It was in the middle, right? Kind of like neutral, like, oh, I maybe have some skills. I would maybe need to talk to my mentor. I'd want to talk to consult with like other teachers in the school of how to address this. So it pretty much was like, I felt somewhat comfortable. Once they got to page 2, all the participants were able to identify, if not all, some of the risk factors that once they were prompted, which is good, right? But initially it wasn't like, wow, this student is a concern, students in crisis. I really need to provide a referral for the student to the mental health professional in the school. The second major theme was stepping in and stepping up. And this is a spectrum of responses. So on one end of the spectrum, there was this really empathic, supportive response of like, gosh, that this student is definitely being challenged right now, is in distress, and I want to attend to that, and I am aware of that. I know that I need to refer a student to the mental health professional in the school. I really need to sharpen my the policies and procedures in the school of what I would do next. Also, again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but like really thinking about the SEL resources, and even like, as I said, curriculum that could be infused. So that's one end of the spectrum, and something we would definitely look for. On the other end, there seemed to be sometimes a blend between personal and professional boundaries. So one student mentioned like, wow, it sounds like this student really needs a friend. I can be this student's friend. While I get where the student's coming from, obviously not the appropriate response, and not something you'd want from like when it comes to dual relationships, right? So befriending the teacher, maybe not the best response. Also, like, I don't really know what I can do to help her. I'm confused of what I need to do next. I don't really know what should happen next, which then kind of goes into this developing response. Some participants saw Lulu as venting. and maybe even putting some judgment on it of what Lulu is experiencing is not right. And even not even using, so felt uncomfortable using terms. So one participant used the term self-deletion, which I'm assuming would be like saying like the student's experiencing suicidal ideation. But so the terminology was a little off, and didn't really identify much action steps they would take to respond to Lulu's situation. So we were like in the middle. So we had, like, as I said, the spectrum of response, I would say like around 50% had the response we would expect if a student like Lulu was in front of you as the teacher. And then there was another end where it was definitely developing, and which definitely I think mirrors what we see in the research, and what we've seen so far in the research, specifically. Anything else, Heather?
No, I think you covered that really well. Thanks.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to start talking a little bit about the implications. So they are really connected to a lot of the literature that we found when we were starting this project. First and foremost is that we need to do a much better job of providing teachers with the information that they need in order to address any mental health concerns that they're seeing. And this is true with regard to the recent legislation, right, that has been in place in terms of social and emotional learning in the state of Nevada. So this is something that teachers feel a great responsibility for, and feel, if I can be so bold, a little bit burdened by, simply because how do I do that? It's not that I don't want to. It's not that I don't want to be helpful. I'm just not sure what to do to support students. So providing them with the information and knowledge as well as the skills. The other thing that's really important that we'll talk about in a moment as well is understanding as teachers, and as I looked through who all's here, we have, I would say, the majority are teachers in some way, shape, or form. But one of the things that was really important for me today is trying to take a little bit of that burden off of your shoulders and saying it isn't your responsibility to do something with the mental health crisis in terms of providing mental health supports. The goal is to be a trusted, caring individual for the student, being someone that they can go to and share that information with. And then your responsibility is to be aware of the supports and services that are in place at your school, in the district, so that you can connect them directly with those supports. Part of that is connecting the dots, right? Connecting the dots in a number of ways. What your responsibility is as a teacher when you show up every day. It is to provide instruction. It is to provide instruction in reading, in writing, in math, also in social and emotional skills, right? Coping skills, all of those things. But connecting the dots back to teacher preparation as well, and making sure that we are doing our part at the higher education level to make sure that teachers go out into the field with the knowledge and information that they need to support students. The other component that is connected to this too, and also certainly a function of connecting the dots, not directly related to COVID, but we certainly all felt the impact of a crisis and the direct impact on academics because of the time of COVID. The same is true with mental health and mental health supports. If students are in crisis, whether that's something that they're sharing publicly or they're keeping to themselves privately, they are going to show some sort of impact on their academics. And we'll talk about that here in a second in terms of things you can be noticing and be aware of. And then, as we were talking about earlier, intensive gatekeeper training, and in a couple of ways, right? So that preventative component, just being that trusted person for students to come to, share information, but also after a crisis has happened, how then do you transition a student back into the classroom? How do you support them in a way that they feel effective and safe being back in a classroom situation and setting. The important component for the gatekeeper training is a phrase came up over and over again in the literature, and that it's the teachers on the front line. That truly is the meaning of gatekeeper. Oftentimes, teachers, for good, bad, or indifferent, see students more than their families do. More hours of the day, they are around them more. And so as much as possible, getting to know them, and we'll talk about why that is going to be important here in a moment. But this graphic really just shows all of the steps that we're going to discuss with regard to what you can do. So, and we'll talk about them individually, but step one, recognizing the warning signs, is going to be your first line of defense. Responding immediately and calmly, listening and showing empathy. Number 4, don't leave the student alone. Number 5, referring them to the appropriate staff. And then finally, self-care for the teacher. So in that first step, we really need to start recognizing the warning signs. Or I'm not going to say start recognizing the warning signs. Listen when we recognize them, because you are the teacher, because you see them every day. And now certainly in high school, this is a little bit different. You see them for a class period, but you do see them every day. If it's block scheduling, you see them every other day. You are familiar with them. You're familiar with their patterns. You're familiar with the way in which they communicate, the way they behave, the way they dress, the way they interact with their peers. All of that, that's your data. That's your gut. And when something feels off, explore it. I always say in this kind of situation that I've never heard anyone feel bad about referring a child that maybe didn't need the level of support, the support that they thought. Certainly, I've heard the opposite. I wish I had taken it more seriously. And it really is about being present and listening and watching. The data that you collect, if you will, on observing the students' interactions is invaluable to the component of really recognizing the warning signs. And so the next one is, oh, I was like, wait a second, that is not what mine looks like.
I hit the button too fast.
Too eager. The warning signs can really fall into 4 general categories, right? That emotional and behavioral changes, those are the things that we were just talking about. Their clothes, their actions, their mood. So this is not necessarily a student who is just quiet. If the student's always been quiet and that's just kind of part of their disposition, that wouldn't be a trigger necessarily. What you're looking for is you're looking in pretty significant changes in the way in which they express themselves, the way they emote. Now, let's be real, this can be really problematic for usually the middle schoolers. They are beginning to come into their own and they start changing quite a bit then. Whether, again, it's their attitude, whether it's their dress, but paying attention to signs of sadness and concern. Again, you know your students and tune into those behavior changes and emotional changes that you're seeing. Changes in habits. So this is all of the things that they do. Are they sleeping more in class? Are they sleeping in class? Are they not eating? Are they reporting that they're not hungry or they're never hungry or they can't sleep at night? Any of those changes in habits are going to be really influential in just kind of tapping in to what's going on in their bodies. Additionally, lots of times interests will change at this point. So a student who has been really committed to cheer or has been a soccer athlete since the time they were able to walk, all of a sudden is disinterested and maybe thinks it's stupid, will kind of beginning to tease or untangle why that might be. Again, so those interests and hobbies start changing. Any significant changes that happen for the student like that are going to be warning signs and triggers. Now, those changes are not going to be a direct referral to a mental health professional. That is going to be your warning sign, your trigger to start scratching at that a little bit and try to see if there's any information, any conversation that you can have with the student about, what might be underlying some of those changes. Another is certainly statements and behaviors about self-harm. You might also see some changes in between, like changes in habits, and also connected to these statements about behaviors about self-harm would be any type of risky behavior, right? So if there are changes in sexuality, becoming sexually adventurous or promiscuous, drug use, engaging in drugs, all of that can be another example of a change in habit, as well as risky behaviors are directly harmful to the student as well. Another component, especially as the teacher, that you might start to identify here would be in their academics, particularly for my ELA teachers that are out there, journaling and written assignments. In what way do they tap into or demonstrate a level of sadness that maybe wasn't there previously? Are they talking about harming themselves? Do they appear to have more of a fixation or attention to or interest in death or topics of suicide? Any drawing, any doodling for art classes, or just as you're walking around the room and you happen to look down as the student is doodling, what are they drawing? And is it of concern for you? Another component is going to be something that may be situational in nature. So these might be specific events, right? So if the student is being bullied, if they are being targeted at school, one of the things that we do know, and is a different experience, certainly than when I was in school a million years ago, but social media does not turn off for students. So it used to be that if a student was being targeted at school, there was an off button. The minute they walked out of the school building, there was a little bit of a reprieve from all of the information and attacks. But through social media, students are often continuing to be targeted once they leave the building. So bullying could be one example. If there has been a death or a divorce or a breakup in the family, but also for students, if they have experienced a breakup that is creating a sadness that is unbearable for them. Certainly issues of abuse can also be a situational trigger. And then one thing that the literature is very clear about too is being aware for your students who identify as LGBTQ+. They have a much higher rate of suicidality and completed suicide, so are a vulnerable population as well. So making sure that you're tuned in to those students and connected to those students as well. Did you guys have anything else to add about that? Actually, I just happened to look over at Jessica's comment, and she said, I'm concerned about my ability to adequately prepare pre-service teachers to handle suicide and mental health when they're completing accelerated training programs. The short version for this is, unless you are getting your degree in mental health, there isn't enough training. And I mean, some would say for those who've completed their training in mental health, that there still isn't enough training. I don't believe that, and this is just my personal opinion, I don't believe that a course or a program can adequately prepare you for this experience. I don't think that, and it's something that you have to continually update yourself on and be aware of, especially with students. When we're talking about ways of engaging in risky behaviors, those are constantly evolving, and triggers and things to identify are constantly evolving. So we have to, as professionals, as teachers, as educators, try to continue professional development, seek out those opportunities to engage in additional professional development. And one of the other things that we'll talk about later is being familiar with those supports and services that are on your campus. That is 100% going to be your best line of defense.
I would add to that it's everybody's job, right? Like it's our job as educators and teachers to seek out training. So just like the fact that you're here today is, I think, a good thing, right? And it's also, I think teachers need to be getting this from multiple angles.
I think the last piece, and something we see with when we're like training our mental health counselors, school counselors, but even just on the research, just like when it comes to teacher ed, like just doing it, practicing it, and definitely tune into these like 8 steps that we outline, like being able just to try it and knowing how to communicate, knowing how to listen, knowing how, like, taking shame out of your response, not questioning, but supporting the student when they do come to you, knowing like, okay, there might be some bumps, but I know that if I exude empathy, if I share an empathic response, if I'm listening, if I am reflecting back what I'm hearing, I'm also ticking down these warning signs, and this ignites, okay, I need to now refer. I'm going to go find the school counselor again, whoever that professional is in school, whatever the protocols are in your school or in your campus, then you support the student in transitioning them. And then sharing with the student too, I'm jumping ahead, but mapping out what happens next. I think sometimes it's like if you do get the student to share and you do have that baseline rapport and working alliance and bond with your students and they share this information, sometimes we take for granted like they don't know what happens next, right? So mapping out, okay, now that you shared this with me, here's what's going to happen next, and here's how I'm going to support you. So I think there's also a piece as well that just comes with practice, that just comes with, again, tuning into these steps, that I think breaks it down in a way that I think is digestible, and then it's practicing it. You just got to practice it, whether it's through advocating for an extensive gatekeeper training, which is our call to action for the districts, extensive gatekeeper training where you actually practice it, where it not only builds your self-efficacy, but you can say, okay, I have these scenarios, now I'm going to practice it and I'm going to role play, and just that ingrains it and how you would move forward. So sorry.
So to that point, I mean, Dr. Feather, just perfect transition there. One of the things that, at least in my experience, we are always looking for the right thing to say. I don't want to mess up. I don't want to say the wrong thing. And in my opinion, you can't say the wrong thing. Or just say, I'm not exactly sure what to say or how to support you or how to help you, but I'm here. Just letting them know, thank you so much for sharing this with me and for trusting me with this, and being honest about what you are prepared and able to do in your position, right? So step 2, and I think step 3 are I go back and forth as to how to talk about one versus the other, because they do oftentimes happen together. So I will say, if you could skip over to step 3 real quick, and then I'll go back to step 2. So listening and showing empathy. So again, this sounds really hard. I'm here for you, and thank you for telling me. And then if we could go back to step 2, sorry. I just wanted to show everyone where we were going. So that responding immediately and calmly is going to be really important. And just take a huge, deep breath. Whatever the student just said and shared with you is probably just sitting out there for them. And they also need a breath. So you taking that opportunity to take a breath and figuring out, okay, what is next? Now, remember, for most of you that are in this room right now, you're teachers. So you have a classroom full of students. So what you do and how you maneuver next and what your next steps are is going to be 100% dependent upon your situation, right? Is there another adult in the room? Meaning, do you have a co-teacher in the room? Is there an instructional assistant in the room? Is there someone else that you can call to watch your class while you engage in this conversation and then figure out what the next steps are? If not, is there an opportunity to get the students working on an activity or whatever it is that you had planned for the day so that you can move to having that conversation with the student in a way that is calm and you have an opportunity to really focus on them? It is not something that you want to have a conversation with them right in front of the entire class, certainly. But what you do want to ask are those direct questions. And again, this is where people get really uncomfortable. I don't know what to say. Do I just put it out there? What if they aren't thinking about suicide at all and I talk about it? Now I've just convinced them that that's a thing that they should do. No, that it doesn't work in that way. This gives us information so that we can make sure that we get them to the right supports and services as immediately as possible. So are you thinking about hurting yourself? Have you thought about suicide? And then all of the questions that are on the right there are also questions that you could ask. Do they have an opportunity or a means to do that? Have they acted on them? And so those are questions that are going to be really important and pressing to have right kind of at the tip of your tongue. So those are the things that you should memorize in terms of, okay, this is what the student said. These are my next go-to questions right after I've gotten the class handled, right? Other times you may need to call down to the front office. Is the school counselor there? And have them come to your room. If there, like I said, if there isn't someone who can watch the class for you, whatever the situation is or however it evolves, the student should not be left alone. And I think that is on maybe the next, no. So you want to make sure that they aren't left alone. You don't give them a pass and say, okay, head up to the front office and see if you can speak with a counselor. We want to make sure that those supports are brought to them and or that you or another trusted adult can escort them to the front office or wherever the counselor's office to have those conversations. We want to make sure that we are identifying these types of questions or sharing of information as being important. One of the things that oftentimes will come up here is students that are attention seeking. So they may engage in this type of language or communication as a means of getting attention. And what I will say to that is there are protocols that are put in place to establish that. That isn't something that you should have to individually make a judgment call on. So you want to make sure that you are providing those supports to the student, regardless of what your interpretation of that situation is. So again, just reflecting back to them that you're hearing them and that the situation is really difficult for them, and that we're going to move next. And one of the things that Dr. Feather said too is letting them know what those next steps are. There are times as the teacher that you're not sure actually what the next steps are, and you can say that. Say, I'm not sure what is next, what the next steps will be, but I need you to know that I'm here to support you through this, and we'll kind of get through this together. So with step 4, like I said, don't leave them alone, particularly if they've said something that is concerning. They are going to oftentimes begin to dismiss that or walk that back and say, oh no, I was just kidding. Or I was just pulling your leg. I'm okay now. I felt bad, but no, I'm good now. Don't listen to that. They've said it, and now we need to go through the process to make sure that we are completing all of the steps that are going to be essential in really following this process out to establish the level of risk for the student. And this is where step 5 becomes really important. Regardless of where you find yourself, what county you find yourself, I see that there's some people are joining us from up north, and that's so awesome to see. Regardless of where you are, your school has an identified crisis team. There are folks on campus that have been identified by the administration as the crisis team on your campus. Know who those individuals are. If at all possible, because some of those, whether it's the school psychologist, the school nurse, is often on those teams as well, and they oftentimes share schools, try to know what their schedules are. If they're consistent, have an idea of what they are, and or be sure that the front office also knows who that crisis and who those crisis team members are. Because when you call the front office, if you aren't sure, we want to make sure that we can get a hold of those individuals, because we have a situation that the crisis team needs to follow up with. And so oftentimes it's the school counselor or a social worker, a safe school professional, depending on your school, an administrator, a school nurse is oftentimes on that list. But you want to know who those individuals are so that you can reach out to them if you have a question or concern. And then the other component for you is, what is the policy at your school or with your district with regard to documenting the incident according to school policy? What I can say here is that the contact log in Infinite Campus can be incredibly helpful. If you have called down and you have sent the student up to the front office, you can certainly add that into a contact log, just to document the information that you were presented and what your response was. And then the last and final step, which is not actually the last and final step, it should be something that we're doing constantly. And I'm going to out myself here and say that I am not great at this. I think that we all need to be better about providing care for ourselves. It's an incredibly difficult job. And certainly when students are in crisis, whether it is through suicidality or whether it is their family is in crisis and they have shared really vulnerable information, all of that, just the job in and of itself is emotionally taxing. So trying to find ways for you to engage in self-care, whether it's again, like meditation, whether it's yoga, whether it's a walk, whether it's talking to a counselor. You can debrief with a colleague, a counselor at the school, your own personal counselor. I would caution you with the colleague component, though, simply because of the importance of not sharing and disclosing that information with other teachers in the building. We don't want gossip to run rampant through the school. So make sure that it's a trusted individual that you are sharing information with about your emotions, not necessarily the specifics of the student's experience. Did you guys have any other stuff that you wanted to add on to that self-care? You guys maybe are better at the self-care component than I am, but I know you both, and I don't think you are either.
Not great, but we definitely take a look at different dimensions of wellness and different areas that we can maybe give more love to. And that's something we do when we conceptualize when we're working with clients and ourselves. So if y'all want more information on the dimensions of wellness and the wellness wheel, which gets like maybe igniting some, then based on these different dimensions, then what areas of self-care can I engage in? That's usually like a starting point for us, and then we go outward of how we can nurture those different dimensions. Please let us know, and we can send you that information for sure.
And I would just add that I think you all are probably really good in your classroom when everyone's getting riled up to tell everybody to stop and take a breath. And sometimes we have to tell ourselves that too.
You're so eager over there. And so just some gentle reminders, some things to reflect back on from our time today. Pay attention to those warning signs. Pay attention to the verbalizations. One of the things that I've noticed, certainly in the last decade, is there is and certainly an increase in my one-on-one experiences with children at all age levels, is the verbalizations and commenting about wanting to die, at whether or not that is intentional or a statement of how they're currently feeling. So that's one of the conversations that I will then have with students, right? So is this something that you are saying because you're frustrated? So a lot of students are lacking coping skills. And when they become frustrated, overwhelmed, they say things. And so talking them through that and trying to figure out other ways of again, engaging in coping skills rather than that being your go-to, because there is a response that we have to have as professionals when you say something like that, that we have to follow through to make sure that a protocol is completed to establish your level of threat. We need to take all threats and behaviors seriously. You are the first step. The teachers that are interacting with students every day, every moment of the waking hours, you are the connection to these students, particularly those students whose home life is not great. And we know that that is a large percentage of our student body as well. You may be their only safe adult. So paying attention to what they're saying with their mouths and also saying with their bodies and saying with their actions. Helping to model the seriousness of the issue goes back to me for those verbalizations. When working in elementary schools, I worked with a lot of students, like I said, who kind of lacked those coping skills. And in the classroom, when they were frustrated, that's what they would say. Oh, I'm so stupid. I just want to die, or I should just kill myself. And once they came down to my office and we had the conversation, oh, I didn't really mean that. And having the conversation with them about those are things that we don't take lightly. We have to do all of these steps because we care about you and we care about how you're feeling. And then circling back and practicing when you're frustrated, what might be a different comment that you could make? You could say, I'm frustrated, I'm overwhelmed, I don't understand this. To replace that language, that negative self-talk, that self-injurious talk, with something that would be much more appropriate. Identifying the warning signs are, again, like I was saying before, your response is going to be individual based on your classroom, based on your grade level that you teach. And we have to have those developmental considerations as well. I will not as a threat or to frighten anyone, that I have had students in elementary schools commit suicide. I have worked directly with students who've experienced their peer who has committed suicide at that age. So please take it seriously. It can happen at all ages, especially because at that age, a lot of students don't understand the finality of death, and are exposed to so much information. Also, with developmental considerations are going to be considerations about ability level and possibly disability or eligibility considerations. So understanding that students, for example, who are on the autism spectrum, may not understand some of the social appropriateness of their comments or what they're saying. And so working with those students to practice, again, those verbalizations. What is appropriate language? What is inappropriate language? What is fitting of your true emotion? Like, how are you feeling inside? And then a plan of action is going to be, I will speak for myself in that situation. I don't do the best under pressure. So when in those situations, if it's helpful to write down the name of the school psychologist, what their phone number is, or those people that are on that crisis team, you might want to have that by your phone so you're not trying to identify, oh, where was that paper? I remember I had that training one time. Who is it that I'm supposed to call? Who is it that's on the crisis team? You want to make sure that you have that information available to you.
Oh. Go ahead, Eller, sorry.
You're good.
I was just going to say, I know in the chat, someone mentioned that they're a kindergarten teacher, and when we're thinking about just one last thing about developmental considerations, I know with the young kids that I used to work with, like, you hear whatever's happening at home or whatever they're experiencing, it's coming out, right? You'll see where maybe their drawings become maybe a little more aggressive. Maybe they're drawing even like death, and you're seeing a shift in behavior. Like, these are all things that you're going to take in your head where you're going to say, okay, I need to check in when this student. And Heather mentioned this before, like, as they get older, when you reach middle school and high school, they definitely have an idea of like what's normal, what's not normal, and sticking out and not being like, the outlier and not wanting to be different and wanting to maybe keep the information tight to the chest and not necessarily share, because they know if I share, this means that X, Y, and Z is going to find out. Parents, guardians are going to find out. So it does become a little harder, but I think a big takeaway from this would be have the working alliance, bond, rapport with your students, listen to your students, be tuned into your students. Well, also, I recognize too, you have a lot of students. That's easy to say, right? But I believe in my heart that if you have that deep connection and understanding of your students, you are the first to recognize. That's why we call you gatekeeper. You will recognize something's off and I need to check in the student.
And I think with that, we're at the end of the presentation. I know we're close on time, but it's 12:56. Here are some resources, and then I'm going to skip ahead. If you all have follow-up questions, please reach out to all three of us, and you can see our emails there, but we probably have time for one or two questions.
I'm looking at the chat real quick. I know, Benjamin, you mentioned like my young university freshmen and sophomores are so digitally addicted that they don't talk at all, even when called into class. This definitely has to deal with, I think, classroom structure. And I'm saying this also, teaching master's students, our classes are a little smaller. So I don't know how big your classes are, but I do know with this generation, they're very motivated by rubrics and knowing what the expectations are. So a lot of times I even have, even with master's students, a participation rubric, and that can include just attending, what are the behaviors you're displaying, are you tapped into your phone? Are you connected? And are you tracking what I'm saying and engaged in that way? How are your contributions and your preparedness and focus and the content that you share? Again, these are just examples of what I use to structure the class and share what the expectations are from the front. And again, you probably do this as well. I also vary up the structure in class. So a lot of activities, a lot of, task-oriented activities, shorter activities, circling around the class, checking in, having more of those one-on-one or small group conversations. Sometimes that opens up the door, I think, to conversation sometimes. But I don't know if that was just a comment and I'm just commenting on your comment, but there it is.
Yeah, I like Benjamin's comment about you're more important than your problems. I think, I always use the example of you haven't found a solution yet, right? So again, that goes back to that empathy versus sympathy and that like modeling the seriousness of the
hope.
issue. But also just being hopeful and teaching them that this moment is not the moment forever. And like I think Dr. Venna said, the little ones, that's a little bit harder to understand. And, if it's a bad breakup in high school, that can also be really hard to understand. So I think sometimes we're always wanting to get to that conclusion of the conversation because we're nervous and the students feeling a lot because they just came and talked to me about this, but just sitting and validating that, like, every concern is worth validating, and then moving from there.
Alicia, I see your comment. Fair is all I have to say. I have a lot of thoughts on this and it's changing every day. And funding's being cut. Yeah,
I don't think it's officially cut yet. I think there's a proposal to cut.
Proposal to cut, I think,
Um,
sorry, I was just making a
yeah.
general statement of mental
Yeah.
health, grants,
Mhm.
whatnot. I'm sorry, Felicia. But yeah,
Mhm.
to be continued and yeah.
Megan's asking what information we need for CEUs. I'm guessing you're going to receive something in your email about that from the people that are lovely enough to put this on. And it's 12:59, so thank you all for coming. I think we'll probably hang around for a couple more minutes. But have a great rest of your day.
Yeah.